Hi, I'm Rick Reef, and welcome to Inside OC. 30 years ago, the Vietnam War ended and Saigon fell. America is still coping with that war. On this show, we'll get the perspective of two youthful Vietnamese Americans. Kathy Nguyen will be along later. Joining me now is Quang Pham. Quang, good to have you on.
Riggs, good to be back on KOCE.
You are a refugee. You became an American Marine, and you are now the author of a book, A Sense of Duty. This is the book, My Father, My American Journey. And I think that says a lot. But Vietnam is not in the title of the book, and you said there was a reason for that.
Well, Random House decided that Vietnam didn't help many books in its publishing titles. So they said, this is an American story. We're going to take Vietnam out. This is an American story. This is a story about a father and son. And they didn't want Vietnam to restrict the book to a wider market.
Well, when this gets translated into Vietnamese, maybe you can say it's my Vietnamese father and my journey, right?
Well, our pictures, the cover of the book says it all.
Yeah, yeah. And talk a little bit, this is, America's been inundated, not just on the 30th anniversary, but forever, with movies and books about Vietnam. What makes this book unique?
Well, Rick, for 30 years now, many films have been made in this country about the Vietnam War, from Apocalypse Now to We Were Soldiers. There were multiple sides to the Vietnam War. The American side has been covered many, many times. The North Vietnamese have been covered in recent movies. What's lacking is the South Vietnamese side of the story. And the South Vietnamese were the longest allies the United States has ever had in a war. And so this book presents that one side, my father's side of the war, the South Vietnamese side.
Right, and it's a sympathetic portrayal. Many, probably most American portrayals of the South Vietnamese have not been very complimentary. But talk about, you know, I was fascinated as I read the book. I mean, these men had to fight for years. And on the other hand, they would go out in the day and then they'd come back to their families at night, which is, you know, something we in America, at least until 9/11, never experienced that kind of thing at home. Talk about that.
Well, for the South Vietnamese, the war was always on. And when you're fighting a war in your own backyard, you just don't get to go home after 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. So my father, a South Vietnamese pilot, the war was on for 16 years. And many, many South Vietnamese were in the same boat.
Right. And let's bring up a few pictures from the book. And why don't you tell us about them?
This is a picture in November 1992 when I first landed in Tustin after a 6-month deployment at sea. And my father had just arrived from Vietnam. He was there to welcome me home to Orange County.
And of course your father served, or I mean he was in a re-education camp for 18 years, which is much of what the book is about.
This is a picture of my father as a young flight student in 1957 over the skies of Texas. He was one of the first 20 Vietnamese pilots to be trained in the United States, and he's sitting in the right seat of a twin-engine B-25 bomber.
And he had a reputation as being quite a pilot, right?
Well, he was a very good pilot, but he had a reputation for flying fast and getting a lot of brawls when he was a younger guy.
And so there's your family, was that in Vietnam?
This was a picture in 1972 aboard Tan Son Nhut Air Base in Saigon.
And which one are you?
I'm the guy.
Standing in the back there?
The hand under his arm.
Okay.
This was a sad picture, and this picture represents many Vietnamese during the last week of April 1975. The evacuation of Saigon involved many aircraft carrying 2 or 3 times their normal loads.
There were how many people? I mean, like on typically a couple hundred, 300 on a plane designed for?
These planes were designed to carry 100 to 150. Our plane had over 200. This one looked like it had about 200 and something people.
Okay. To give folks a flavor of the book, why don't you just read, I'm going to ask you to read a couple passages, but right now read this passage which I think addresses your experience as a Vietnamese U.S. Marine.
And now, you know, Rick, 20 years later, it's easier to read what had happened at
I have some glasses here. Would this help? Would this help?
I already had LASIK. Thank you. I'm reading from a chapter called A Few the Proud when I went to Marine Officer Candidate School in the summer of 1986. And it goes like this. When your name is Quang Pham and you check into Charlie Company or C Company at U.S. Marine Officer Candidate School 11 years after the fall of Saigon, you don't expect any breaks. When the elite outfit you're trying to join has lost thousands of young men in the Quang Nam, Quang Ngai, Quang Tin, and Quang Tri provinces, you don't expect anyone to pronounce your name correctly, even if it was known how. I hope these guys who were going to make my present a hell and determine my future realized that the war was over. I was called a VC, a Viet Cong at Quantico, Virginia, even though I had nothing to do with the U.S. debacle in Vietnam. I was only a kid on the U.S. side, on the losing side, but to my Marine instructors, I symbolized that loss and shame. My father was still paying for that loss at a prison camp. All I could do was remember that his predicament was infinitely worse than mine.
Wow. Talk a little bit about the biggest upside and biggest downside of your experience as a U.S. Marine.
I'll talk about my biggest upside. In February 1991, I was a young pilot out of Tustin, and I was fortunate enough to be in a flight that landed in Kuwait City, Kuwait, on the day of its liberation. So here I was 16 years earlier as a refugee in the Vietnam War. On the other side of liberation, I was able to see what the United States and the free world could do in freeing Kuwait. The downside, it was very little downside to being a U.S. Marine in my experience. The toughest part was the beginning of my career when those movies were pervasive, and some of the Marines who saw those movies and the portrayals of South Vietnamese treated me as if I was one of those in the movies.
How do you feel like a movie like Full Metal Jacket, which I just think is a great movie? How does it strike you? I mean, is it upsetting or?
Yes, I mean, 99% of people who watch Full Metal Jacket think it's probably one of the greatest Marine movies, especially from the Vietnam era. But as a South Vietnamese, when I watched it, I saw comments made about the South Vietnamese running away from battle. I saw a South Vietnamese officer being portrayed as a pimp. I saw derogatory comments made about the South Vietnamese, and they were inaccurate. That's not how the war was.
You have so many terrific anecdotes in the book. I'm going to bring up another picture now, which is of General Nguyen, probably one of the most famous pictures of the Vietnam War. You actually met him. Talk about that, and that's in the book, but it was kind of a brief and rather bizarre experience.
General Nguyen Ngoc Loan was the Saigon police chief in 1968, and this picture was taken during the Tet battle in February '68, and General Loan executed this prisoner. The picture was shown worldwide the next day with no explanation. The Viet Cong had just killed a member of his team and his entire family. General Loan happened to be a Vietnamese Air Force pilot who was one of my dad's superiors. So in 1995, at a Vietnamese Air Force reunion right here in Orange County, my father introduced me to this major figure of the Vietnam War, and by then he had become an old man, an aging man. But to my father, he was a hero, and to many South Vietnamese, General Loan was a hero, except for that one picture.
And you just kind of shook his hand, and or you actually kind of bowed, or talk about that.
Well, my father had never introduced me to anybody, not even to South Vietnam's ex-vice president in this manner, and here he was being very polite, and so I was surprised to meet this person. And when I saw General Loan in 1995, I immediately recognized his face and his posture.
Now, you are right now in the middle of a book tour. And so you're going around, you're an envoy for the Vietnamese community in the United States, for the South Vietnam story, and also for Orange County. Let's talk about Little Saigon first, or the Vietnamese community here in California. Do people elsewhere in the country understand that this is a center of the Vietnamese community?
Definitely. I've been to about 11 cities of a 20-city book tour. I'm back for 2 days. People know where Orange County is. People know that Little Saigon is in Orange County. So all the newspapers had featured Orange County and Little Saigon and where the Vietnamese are 30 years after the war.
Do you get any kidding? Oh, the OC and that kind of thing. Do you get much of that?
I got some of the OC comments about 6-7 months ago, but when they see me, they don't see me as an OC character, as in the Fox show.
Great. Another passage that I'd like you to read. 1995, which was of course the 20th anniversary. You go back to Vietnam. You've left the Marines, I believe, and you now go to Vietnam. And this is as you're returning now again to the States.
This was in April of 1995, right after I was discharged from the Marine Corps. And it goes in the chapter, Can't Go Back. My week in Vietnam ended at the same place I had taken off in April of 1975. Getting out was much easier the second time. As the Vietnam Airlines jet lifted off and banked over the Saigon River, I sat by myself in the last row, half-dazed, staring down at the hazy countryside I had now left twice. I was looking at a place where sorrow had struck millions of lives, where policies and policy makers failed miserably, and where brave young Americans and South Vietnamese paid with their lives in a sincere effort to secure freedom for the Republic of Vietnam. A month earlier, I had visited the Vietnam Wall in Washington, paying my respects again to those who had given everything they had in the futile effort that brought me as a boy to their land. They weren't wrong. Their leaders were wrong. As the tile roof houses and the brown rice paddies receded below, and 20 years of memories and feelings came rushing back, I could no longer hold back the tears. Life goes on. Once again, I was on a plane heading for a place where I had found a chance to live. This time, I was really going home, back to America as an American.
Wonderful
right here
stuff.
to Orange County.
Quang will be joined by our friend Kathy Nguyen in just a moment. We'll be back after this. And it's time for the OC Insider from the Orange County Business Journal and other sources. Well, this is Chris Mears, who spars with me every month on Real Orange. Mears is also chairman of the California Athletic Commission. It regulates boxing in the state. Well, now Mears is duking it out with Arnold Schwarzenegger. The governor wants to knock out the commission and give its duties to the Department of Consumer Affairs. Mears says he won't go down without a fight. And what OC person did Time magazine recently name as one of the world's 100 most influential people? Was it Donald Bren of the Irvine Company? No. How about popular author Dean Koontz? No. What about these two? Not even. It was Rick Warren, pastor and mega-selling author of The Purpose-Driven Life. Well, there were lots of comments on the recent interview with controversial lawyer Joe Cavallo. Cavallo's statement that he'd heard somebody else, actually writes Frank Mickadite's OC Register column, brought this reaction from Mickadite. He's nuts. And Assistant Deputy District Attorney Susan Schroeder had this to say. As to Cavallo's claim that I leaked information to the media in violation of the court's order, he withdrew the motion because his claims were based on lies and misrepresentations. And viewer Debbie Emery writes that she enjoyed the show, even if Cavallo is a jerk, and she's happy he wasn't able to dance around questions like Greg Heidel needing professional help. Well, thank you, Debbie, but I thought Cavallo shot pretty straight. That's it for The Insider. Kathy Nguyen is about to join Quang Pham and me. First, here's David Nazar. He went to Little Saigon and has this story of one mother's struggle.
The Vietnamese population has steadily increased over the years in Orange County as more and more refugees flocked to Westminster's Little Saigon. The majority of people living here sought refuge in the late 70s and early 80s. Many escaped oppression and political persecution in their homeland of South Vietnam. They saw Little Saigon as an opportunity to start a brand new life. Hung Lee was one of those people. She escaped her country in 1979.
I'm just so scared. You know, we cannot talking anything about the politics. I don't want to talk about that when I'm working because we don't know. If they can put you in jail if you say something not right.
Hung's family was poor. She was young, newly married, and had a baby daughter. All their savings and their home were taken away. Somehow, though, they managed to scrape up enough money to buy their way onto a boat that would take them and 130 other people out of Vietnam.
We go to the sea, and my boat had the pirates rob for 4 times, rob us, and rape the woman. That's a terrible time. You know, I still alive. I think I die in the sea.
Hung made it to Malaysia, then onto another boat where she almost died, eventually taking shelter in Indonesia, where she stayed for almost a year and a half.
After that terrible ordeal at sea and the stay in the Indonesian refugee camp, Hung Lee finally made her way to the United States, first to Arkansas, and then eventually settling right here in Orange County. That's when things should have gotten better for her family. However, life only got tougher as everything took a turn for the worse.
I'm so happy because I have freedom. I know I can talk. I'm not afraid.
That happiness would be short-lived.
I'm so happy, and I always tell American, accept me and let us stay here. I'm so happy because, that's my new life, and my new life for my husband and my kid. But, my husband died. I'm so sad because he died. I don't want to talk about him. Make me sad.
Hung was all alone to take care of her 4 young children. She got a job as a seamstress to put her kids through school. No matter what, Hung was determined to give her children a better life than she had.
I have to because I love my kids. I love them. I have to work hard to take care of them. But I still love my husband.
Hung did take good care of her kids. Today they're all successful. Her oldest daughter graduated from UCLA and works as an auditor. Her youngest daughter's at UCLA now, and her middle daughter goes to Golden West College. Her son is a store manager at South Coast Plaza. And Hung, she owns a thriving business in Little Saigon, selling jewelry at her store here. It's human nature to survive. Hung did a lot more than that.
I think God always with me. God always protect me and my kids.
In Westminster, I'm David Nazar.
And I'm back with Quang Pham, and joining us is Kathy Nguyen. Kathy recently graduated from UCI with a double major in film and economics. She's a budding actress and a TV host. Great to have you on, Kathy.
Great to be on. Thanks very much,
Okay,
Rick.
and that segment, I mean, it just seems like the Vietnamese community here and in San Jose, where you're from, is just full of these success stories.
Yeah, definitely. I believe a lot of Vietnamese Americans that struggle to come here, a lot of them are very hardworking, and like the parent that was shown in the interview clip beforehand, a lot of older Vietnamese Americans struggle to really give their children a better life here and work hard.
And you represent that new generation of hope and promise. Why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself, and we're going to run a couple clips here that show you and doing what you do.
All right. Well, do you want me to talk a little bit about
Sure.
the film? Basically, Spirits is a film directed by Victor Vu, a Vietnamese ghost story that combines elements of romance, fate, karma, and reincarnation, all in a 3-part story that all connects at the end.
And where is this being distributed?
This is currently being distributed through Thuy Nga Entertainment, and
Okay, and here you are as the TV host. Look at that.
Here I am. I'm a TV host now. Okay, change. I'm a TV host now.
This is even better than Quang stuff. This is good.
Yeah, this is just a little snippet of like different segments we've done on our show. As you can tell, it's a magazine variety show. We interview various people in entertainment, lifestyles, culture, and pretty much exposing Vietnamese American talents.
Now, your work as a TV host landed you in some controversy recently. Why don't you talk about that?
Well, it was unfortunate what happened, but it was a big miscommunication between the older and the younger generation. Basically, what happened was we interviewed 2 documentary filmmakers on the documentary Saigon, USA, which was a documentary about the 1999 protests in Little Saigon when a video store owner displayed a picture of Ho Chi Minh. And this was 52 days of protesting in 1999. We interviewed the 2 filmmakers. Along with our interview segment, we included a snippet from the documentary. This was a CNN clip actually taken from a documentary put on our Vax TV show. It showed a picture of Ho Chi Minh in it. A couple members of the community, the older Vietnamese community, misunderstood. They didn't understand English because our show was in English. And they thought we were promoting communism and promoting Ho Chi Minh. So they, of course, were angry at that, like anyone would be if they thought that was the case, and protested or complained to Saigon TV, our partnering station. And they took our show off the air.
Well, that's terrible.
Yeah.
So now,
It was a big miscommunication.
are you hoping to get the show back on? Because it looked like a very lively show there.
Definitely, I had so much fun. Basically, right now we are in negotiations with a couple other networks, and we are hoping to relaunch very soon.
Well, great. Let's talk about the generational divide or the generational difference in Little Saigon. I'll ask you first, and then I'll get Quang's opinion on it. He's sitting there so patiently right now. But you know, is it this 30-year anniversary? Is it for your generation a big deal?
Definitely, I think it is. I think at the same time, me being born and raised here in California, I may not know firsthand from first experience what it was like to be in a country when it you know, when the communists took over and to escape the country. But I hear stories from my parents, and as I'm getting older, I really do want to connect with my roots. I don't want it to be lost. I don't want my children to not speak Vietnamese and have the culture totally lost, and because even though we are assimilating here in the United States with American culture. And I think although I don't know firsthand, I do have an urge to learn and to be reconnected with my culture.
Quang, how do you feel about that?
Well, she's from the younger generation. I'm from the Middle Ages. And like Kathy, we still have deep ties. My generation, we're the kids who grew up during the war. And when Saigon fell, we were old enough to remember it, but not to make sense of it. So 30 years later, I'm still making sense of it. And through the book, that's what I did, was to go back and answer the tough questions. The role of the South Vietnamese in the war, why Saigon was lost, and what can we learn from the whole experience?
Mm-hmm. Let's talk a little bit both about prejudice and acceptance, because it seems like there's a lot of acceptance of the Vietnamese community, pride among many people in Orange County over the remarkable success stories. On the other hand, there's still sometimes complaints, or at least there used to be complaints that, you know, the Vietnamese came in and took over this whole area and things like that. Do you ever encounter that kind of feeling?
Well,
Kathy?
actually now living in Westminster, I know it is predominantly Vietnamese Americans living in Westminster, but I do sometimes get that pride, like that prejudice stereotype from other people. I remember just quick one incident on the street where I asked someone in Hollywood for directions somewhere, and he asked me where was I from, and I said from California, and he said, where are your parents from? I said, Vietnam, and he said, well, go ask your parents. Go.
Wow.
That's what he said, but that's...
Oh, that was Hollywood.
That was Hollywood. That was Hollywood. But yeah, I do sometimes still face that prejudice.
And Quang, do you get a sense, I mean, how do you balance prejudice and acceptance?
For me, there's been a lot of progress been made the last 5 to 10 years. When I was in the Marines, there were a lot of resentment and misunderstanding in the Marines and in the culture. People are afraid, and they act out of ignorance, and they're not reaching out. And I think that's where the prejudice rise out of all the tension.
Right.
So I would like to see people come into Little Saigon from different parts of the county, but at the same time, Little Saigon has to be friendly, English friendly for non-Vietnamese speaking visitors and tourists. We talk about Little Saigon being this big tourist hub. Well, it's going to be more friendly for non-Vietnamese speakers, because nobody else besides the Vietnamese will go into Little Saigon in the next 5 or 10 years.
Well, maybe as we have people like Kathy that are promoting it and that sort of thing, you know, but for the non-Vietnamese person who goes to Little Saigon, what should they check out? Or you got any recommendations on shops or what they should try as far as food, or, you know, that sort of thing?
Well, they have to eat pho. That's the first. There's a pho restaurant in like every
And those are
corner
noodles, right?
Yeah.
Those are
Pho is
the
a
great noodle dishes.
very popular beef noodle soup that often is named by numbers, like pho 1-1, or pho 54, or pho 909, or pho 1 through 100.
Okay, Kathy, what would you rather eat? Hamburger and fries or pho? What do you like more?
Oh, well, you're asking. I'm going to obviously say pho, because I am not a big hamburger eater.
Okay, a chicken salad, you know what?
You know, I like to try different things all the time, but I'm definitely a fan of pho. I have to eat pho twice a week.
And Quang, how about you? What is it? Hamburgers and fries or pho?
What kind of burger are we talking about? In and out?
Yes, in and out.
Pho.
Okay, all right, great. We just didn't have enough time. It was great having both of you on. And my multi-talented guests have been refugee, Marine, entrepreneur, and author Quang Pham, and double major actress and TV personality Kathy Nguyen. And if you've been watching, you're probably multi-talented too. And I thank you for watching. I'll see you again inside OC.
think that it was made for my great-grandmother, and she was born in 1854.
Okay.
And it has been in my family all of these years. She lived in Tennessee and then moved to Florida in sometime in the early years of her life.
Okay, and this had an interesting usage, I understand. It was used to store something,
It
right?
was. Well, my uncle had found it and used it to store fishing tackle,
Okay, fishing tackle
on his front porch. And my mother decided we needed to do something about it right away. So we've had it inside ever since.
You take care of it in
Take
your own
care of
home.
it, right.
Okay.
It's in my own home now.
This is a cherry wood slant front desk. And actually, because this desk has, because it has 2 drawers, right? And a normal adult-sized desk would have 4. It probably was, in fact, made for a child. Probably made as a token, a love token, maybe from a father, a cabinet maker, to his daughter. This probably was, in fact, made in Tennessee. It's cherry wood. It's got tulip poplar secondary woods. All the drawer sides are tulip poplar. And if we look at the skirt here, this is a classic Tennessee type skirt. I love these delicate legs. I love this beautiful shaping. Isn't that nice? Sort of a nice, delicate. And these are all little writing compartments in here to keep things in. And there's some ink stains over the years. It's been used, thoroughly used. The condition is fairly good on this piece, but I want to open up the drawer. We always try to look at the insides. And I want to show you something here and have you look at the drawer fronts. Can you see a difference there between these 2 sections? See the thickness?
I do the thickness,
See, that's thicker on the top
right.
than the bottom? Well, what's happened here, if we look at this upper drawer here, you see that there's a patch right there. Probably this got locked and somebody broke the lock out. It splintered the wood. So what they did is add a little strip on front. And if you look here, actually right here, you can see the hole there with the new drawer front. You see that right there? You can see the new drawer front. But if you take that off, you'll have underneath the original drawer front. So it really didn't hurt the piece too much in terms of the overall value. This is kind of fun. Do you see that right there?
I see that.
That's a little mouse or rodent chew hole where it got stuck in there. Probably not while it was in your home, but probably in the 19th century. That may be a 19th century mouse that did that, I think. And you can see the patina over it, and it's been like that a long time. So I want to assure you, you don't have mice in your home. It adds to the charm of the piece because a mouse got in there and then tried to get out. Have you had it appraised ever?
No, I have not.
Okay.
I have not.
Never had it appraised. Okay, well, certainly the condition has got nice color. It's got rich cherry wood color, which we like. Certainly, you'd have to bring the drawer back to the original state if you wanted, And the brasses are, in fact, original, which is actually nice. We see New England desks. We see New York desks, child's desks. We rarely see Southern ones. I'd probably insure this for in the area of about $6,500.
Goodness gracious. That's wonderful. Thank
so you really have a lucky daughter who's going to inherit this and cherish it.
I will. Thank you
well, thank you.
much.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thanks for coming.
This was a collection that my husband's grandfather had. He was in the Army after the American Indian War, and he was assigned to this photographer, Mr. Berry, to take him safely on his journey where he was photographing the American Indians.
And what was your great-grandfather's name?
Frank Karst.
Frank Karst.
K-A-R-S-T.
And he's in Company A of the 2nd Cavalry. Let's talk a little bit about David S. Berry, though, because he was one of the great Western American photographers at the close of the Indian Wars.
Right.
He was from Wisconsin and immigrated to work for a photographer in the Dakota Territories, and about the early 1870s.
Right.
And it was at the end of this period that he met up with your husband's great-grandfather and was photographing under his protection or his guidance. But the thing about Berry that's so great is that Berry became good friends with a lot of the Indians. And he was a good friend with Sitting Bull, and Sitting Bull actually gave him the name the Little Shadow Catcher. But let's just look at some of the things you've got here. These photographs all along in here are from Berry's early period of work in the 1870s and 1880s. These later photographs are from the 1890s and 1900s. There's a different style of paper, different style of developing. This is Barry himself here,
Yes.
I think, as you know.
I recognize that.
Barry photographed a lot of the important leaders in the Indian Wars. He photographed guys like Curley, who was supposedly